Every time the moon went dark over ancient Mesopotamia, the priests did not reach for answers. They reached for weapons. To them, an eclipse was not a shadow crossing the moon, it was an attack. 7 things they could only see in that short darkness, climbing the sky to drag the moon god down. When the warning was bad enough, they hid their own king, put a stranger on the throne in his place, and waited for the danger to pass. One clay tablet lays out who the 7 were, where they came from, and the one rule that let them show up at all. The tablet is the last in a set of 16. The words on it were first pressed into wet clay in Sumerian nearly 4,000 years ago, then copied and copied again for the next 2,000, often in 2 languages at once, the Old Sumerian on one line and the Akkadian version under it, so the meaning would live on even after the first language stopped being spoken day to day. Experts call the whole set Utuku Lemnutu. The name means, in plain words, evil demons. The copies we know best were dug out of the buried library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, in what is now northern Iraq. That library burned when the city fell, and the fire did something strange. It baked the clay harder, the way a hot oven does, and saved the tablets through the fall that should have destroyed them. They sat under the broken stone for 2,500 years. When diggers pulled them out in the 1800s, and the first experts learned to read the writing again, they found shopping lists, and deals, and lists of laws. They also found this. Another copy of the same 16th tablet sits in a museum case in New York, carried out of the ruins of Babylon and bought by an American preacher near the end of the 19th century. It is filed there as 8611382, and it has sat on a shelf, walked past, for well over 100 years. Nearly all of the set reads like a doctor's handbook. Spells against fever, against wasting away, against the things the Sumerians believed could slip into a sleeping body and refuse to leave. 15 tablets of that. Grim, repeated, plain. Then comes the 16th, and the topic changes completely. The 16th tablet leaves the sickbed and looks up at the sky. And what it sets down there is the night the moon was taken. Start with what the scribe actually wrote down, because the order matters. First, a number. 7. Not some vague crowd, not an army, not a swarm. 7. The text says it over and over. 7 in heaven, 7 on the earth, and then, as if 7 were not enough, twice 7 they are. A people who counted grain and taxes down to the very last one did not pick that number by accident. They counted them, the way you count things that are right in front of you. Then it describes them, and that is where the strange part starts. These 7 were not gods in the usual way, and they were not animals. The tablet says they were neither male nor female. They had no wife, no husband, no children, no family of any kind. They did not know mercy. They could not be argued with, because prayer and begging meant nothing to them, the way begging means nothing to a storm. They were, in the scribe's own words, the children of the god Anu, the Sky Father, born high in the mountains and sent down into the world. And in the same breath, the texts call them the brothers and sisters of the Anunnaki, the great gods of Mesopotamia, and the servants of the world below, the ones who carried the throne of Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld. Sit with that for a second. The same family tree that made the gods the Sumerians prayed to also made these, the Anunnaki on one branch, the 7 on the other. Same roots, opposite aim. The older chants even try to describe them one at a time, and the list reads like a fever. One is a wind out of the south. One is a dragon. One is a leopard that carries off the young. One is a snake. One is a raging wolf that does not know how to back down. One attacks God and king alike, and the 7th is an evil wind that takes its revenge on everything it touches. They are written as forces, not faces. Wind, flood, snake, storm. The Sumerians were telling you, in the only language they had, that these were not creatures you could draw. They were things that happened to you. And here is the part the rest of the tablet is built around, the one every later copy keeps coming back to. The 7 did not show up whenever they pleased. They had a rule. One exact moment when they could act at all. They came when the light failed. Not in daylight. The glare of the sun shut them out completely. Not under a full moon, when the whole night was bright. They rose only in the dark, and not just any dark. They rose in the exact darkness of an eclipse, the moment the moon's own light was being choked out of the sky. That is the part worth saying slowly. According to these texts, there was a kind of being that the most careful record keepers of the ancient world swore could only be seen during an eclipse. And the tablet does not leave the reason for you to guess. It tells you exactly why. The reason is the myth carved onto that 16th tablet, and it is the part most versions hide in the footnotes. The 7 did not just show up during the eclipse. In the Sumerian story, the 7 were the eclipse. They were what the people believed was happening up there while the moon's face went dark. The story runs like this. The moon, the god the Sumerians called Nana and the Akkadians called Sin, is shining in his place in the sky. Then the 7 rise. They come up like a flood, the text says. They climb against the sky the way a storm rolls in against a coast, and they set themselves in front of the moon god, angrily, on purpose, boxing him in on every side. And then comes the line that should make the hair on your arms move. They reach out to the moon, God's own helpers, the sun and the storm, the gods Shamash and Adad, and they pull them over to their side. The light that should have protected the moon is turned against him. He is alone up there, going dim, with the 7 closing in. Far below, the god of wisdom hears of it. His name is Ea, and he lives in the freshwater deep the Sumerians called the Apsu, the deep water beneath the world. The messenger Nusku carries the news down to him. And Ea, the cleverest of all the gods, the one who always has an answer ready, acts in a way that tells you how serious this is. He bites his lip. He fills his mouth with wailing. The smartest being in the world hears that the 7 have surrounded the moon, and the first thing he feels is grief. Then he does the only thing left to do. He calls his son, the young god Marduk, and he sends him up to break the attack and pull the moon out of their hands. Now pay close attention to one thing, because it changes what this tablet is. The story was not written down only to be remembered. It was written down to be used. When an eclipse actually came, the priest said this exact text out loud, as a weapon. The chant was the strike back. By telling the story of Marduk going up to fight the 7, the priest believed he was helping it happen, adding his voice to the rescue of the moon. So the tablet in that museum case is not a record of a myth. It is the script of a ritual that men carried out, in the dark, while the moon disappeared above their heads, because they believed the words themselves could drive the 7 back. Pay attention to what that whole story is really saying, because it explains everything. The Sumerians were not confused about what they were seeing. They watched the moon go dark, slowly, from one edge inward, exactly the way a shadow creeps. They watched the color change, sometimes all the way to a deep copper red. And they built an answer that fit every part of it. The dimming was an attack. The thing doing the choking was the 7. And the reason you could only see them then, the reason they were unseen on every other night, was simple. They were the act of the eclipse itself. No eclipse, no 7. The darkness was the creatures, and there was no splitting the 2 apart. That belief might sound like something safely shut inside a clay tablet, a buried idea from a vanished religion. It was not. It reached out of the temple and put its hand on the throne of the most powerful empire in the area, and it cost real people their lives. Because the eclipse, to these people, was not only an attack on a god, it was a warning aimed at a man. The warning texts are blunt about it. When the moon was taken by the 7, the meaning on earth was that a king was not meant to survive, not a small worry, a clear prediction that the ruler would not live through what was coming. So the Assyrians built a way out of it. We know it from their own letters, written by the king's star readers to their kings and found in the thousands. When the Watchers worked out that an eclipse fell in the wrong part of the sky, the part of the moon's face they had matched to their own land, and when no safe planet stood in the sky to cancel it, the order went out. The king stepped down, not in public. He dropped out of sight and was quietly called the farmer. In his place, on his throne, in his robes, they sat a stand-in, a stranger, often a prisoner already doomed, sometimes a man no one cared about that the records do not name. For up to 100 days, that stand-in lived as king. He was given the palace, the food, the riches, and in some stories a queen at his side. He sat on the throne and took on the warning meant for the true king, the way a lightning rod takes a strike that was aimed at the house. And at the end of the 100 days, when the danger was seen as over, the stand-in did not get to walk away. He and his queen were dressed, honored, mourned, and sent to the fate the stars had written for the king. The records say they were wept over and buried with full royal honors. They simply did not leave the throne alive. Only then did the farmer come back out of hiding and take up his own crown again. You would think that somewhere in 400 years of doing this, someone would have written down that it felt monstrous. As far as we can tell, no one did. They treated it like a chore. We even know one of their names. In the rule of the Assyrian king Esarhaddon, a man called Damki was put on the throne as a stand-in to carry an eclipse warning away from the crown prince. Damki and his queen did not survive it. A royal officer named Mar Ishtar wrote a calm letter to the king afterward, reporting that the stand-in had gone to his fate and that the land was safe. A life ended, filed under good news. A second set of evidence sits next to the demon tablets, and it is the part that makes all of this hard to wave away as just an old belief. The same people who wrote about 7 creatures in the dark also ran one of the most careful skywatching programs the ancient world ever made. It was written into a huge set of warning tablets the Babylonians called Enuma, Anu, and Lil, dozens of tablets writing down what the sky did and what each thing was supposed to mean. They did not watch eclipses in a lazy way. They mapped them. They split the face of the moon into parts and matched each part to a land, so that whichever part of the moon's face darkened first told them which kingdom the warning was aimed at. They wrote down which watch of the night the shadow entered, how long it lasted, what color it turned, which way it moved across the moon's face. They followed the planet Jupiter at the same time, because the right light in the right place could, by their rules, cancel the danger fully and send everyone home. This was not a handful of frightened priests guessing. It was a set team of trained watchers, working in shifts, passing written reports between cities, keeping records that ran unbroken for hundreds of years. They got good enough at it that they could see eclipses coming before they arrived. That is the chilling part. They were not reacting to the dark. They were waiting for it. The real question is what those watchers were actually writing down when they wrote about the 7. And this is where you have to be honest about 2 ways to read the same tablet. Up to this point, the simplest story is that a frightened people made up monsters to explain a shadow. That is the version most history experts would hand you, and most of it holds together. But it does not quite cover everything, and the gap is where this stays interesting. Here is the down-to-earth version, the one that does not need a single magic thing to be true. An eclipse is, to an eye that does not know what causes it, truly terrifying. The one steady, trusty light in the night sky, the one thing that had never once failed, begins to be eaten away from one side. It turns the color of dried rust. For a people with no idea of how shadows move in space, nothing about it looked like sky science. It looked like an attack. So, they reached for the only set of ideas they had, which was a world packed with unseen beings that wanted things, and they described what they saw as exactly as they could inside that set of ideas. The number 7, holy and whole to them, for a force that felt total, the lack of family, the lack of mercy, the way no prayer reached them, all of it a way of saying this thing cannot be bargained with, the way the dark cannot be bargained with. Read like that, the 7 add up to a people's best try at writing down terror. And that read is probably right, but notice what it does not wipe out. It does not wipe out the rule. Whatever the 7 were, belief or being, the people who wrote them down were fully steady on the one rule that sets them apart. They show up only when the light dies. That much the record gets exactly right, and the tablets back it with no exception. Never in the day, never at the full moon, only in the dark the eclipse makes. There is a deeper reason under that rule, and it is worth following. In the Sumerian map of the world, the dangerous things lived below. In the deep water and in the land below, the kingdom of Ereshkigal, whose throne the 7 carried. The upper world was held safe by light. The sun ruled the day. The moon stood guard over the night, the lamp that kept the lower darkness in its place. So their picture of the world builds its own answer to the why. The 7 could not climb while the moon shone, because the moon's light was the lid on the world below. The eclipse was the one moment that lid came off. The single night the guard failed, and the things that belonged underneath could rise. That is why they show up only then. Not because the dark is when they like to come out, but because the dark is the only door that ever opens for them. There is, of course, a louder reading, and it would be unfair to pretend it is not out there. In the 1970s, the writer Zecharia Sitchin took the Anunnaki of these same Sumerian texts and argued they were real, living visitors from another world, a people who came down from the sky and shaped early humans. Sitchin's translations have been turned down by nearly all real experts in the language, and that call is fair and well-backed. But because the seven are written into the texts as brothers and sisters of the Anunnaki, born of the same Sky Father, the out-there reading pulls them in too. In that telling, the seven are not a stand-in for darkness at all. They are something that came down with the family, and the eclipse is simply the only time they choose to be seen. There is no proof for that, none. If the seven had stopped at being a poem about shadow, this would not still be argued over. They did not stop there, and that is exactly why people keep coming back to the tablet. And somehow the down-to-earth version leaves one thread hanging that keeps the whole question alive. The Sumerians were ruthless record keepers. When they did not understand something, they usually said so, or they buried it in prayer. The 7 parts do not read that way. They read like a report, a count, a list of features, what they do, and the one set rule for when they do it. That is the way you write down something you have seen, set down the same careful way they wrote down a flood or a harvest. Whether what they saw was a shadow or something they believed was moving inside the shadow, they wrote it down with the same flat care they gave everything else. And they were not the only ones. The dread of the eaten moon shows up far beyond Mesopotamia, in land after land that watched the same sky in that time, each of them describing something climbing up to swallow the light. The 7 themselves did not stay shut in one set of tablets either. They march back into Mesopotamian writing again and again, turning up centuries later as the 7 weapons of a war god, living on in charms and lucky pieces, copied and chanted long after the cities that first feared them were gone. It seemed, at the time, like a small, shared belief. It was not small. It was one of the oldest fears people ever bothered to write down, and it lived on, in baked clay, for 4,000 years, waiting for someone to learn the writing and read it back. So go back to where this started. A night in Mesopotamia, the moon going dim from one edge inward, the color draining out of it. The priests are not staring up in wonder, they are counting. 1 through 7, marking the coming of things they believe only this exact darkness can show, and saying the words that are supposed to send them back. Somewhere in the palace, a king is being quietly walked out a side door, and a stranger is being dressed in his robes to take the doom meant for him. And a scribe, by lamplight, is pressing into clay the same words his grandfather's grandfather pressed, unchanged, because the rule had never changed. The tablet is still here, the last of 16, in 2 lost languages, in a quiet museum case, most visitors never slow down for. It still says the same thing it always said. There are 7 of them. They are the children of the sky and the family of the gods of the underworld. They cannot be seen in daylight, and they cannot be seen under a full moon. They come only when the moon's light is taken, and they come to take the rest of it. The next eclipse is already on the calendar. The shadow will cross the moon the way it always has, slow and red and silent. The 7, whatever they ever were, kept only one date in all of written history. And the moon is going to go dark, right on time.